Alright, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Polyglot grind again as always. It has been a while since I made a video. In case anybody's wondering, I'm still learning Hebrew. I'm struggling a lot with it because it's completely different from any language that I've ever learned ever, aside from Arabic, but I didn't get very far in Arabic. Like, I didn't even get past the extreme beginner phase. I can only say a couple words and phrases in Arabic. I didn't get very far. So anyway, today's topic is a pretty controversial one. I don't know how controversial it is, but it's pretty controversial amongst the people that I know. And that is practicing languages with non-native speakers. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, and that is welcomed. Everybody can have their own opinion. So I'm just going to share my opinion, and as I said, you are free to disagree with me. I'm just talking about this because I found it interesting and because I see so much variation in beliefs. Anyway, so my opinion on speaking a foreign language with non-native speakers, like obviously you can't avoid this completely. And like, for example, you are a Canadian and then you move to Japan and then you meet a Russian who doesn't speak English and your only common language is Japanese. Then by all means, speak Japanese together. I'm not saying that you're not allowed to speak to non-native speakers in a foreign language, but I'm just saying that, like, in my personal opinion, I personally do not like to speak to non-native speakers. And then my reasoning behind that is, if I speak to a non-native speaker, then we'll copy each other's mistakes. And obviously people will disagree with me on this because, like, it works for some people, but like for me personally, I like to have only authentic input. I like to only receive authentic input that is produced by a native speaker, because native speakers make certain mistakes that non-native speakers don't make. Like, if you're a native speaker of Japanese and then you learn French, aspects of Japanese will trickle into your French. So if I were to try and speak French as a native English speaker with a Japanese person or something, or a Russian or a Korean or a German who had learned French, then aspects of their native language will trickle down into the language that we want to practice together, and then we might copy each other's mistakes. Like, an example of this is, and I've seen this many times before amongst like internationals that come to Canada to learn English and then only hang out in groups of other internationals, which is another issue that I'm going to talk about in another video, because you would learn English a lot faster if you come to Canada and then hang out with Canadians. Because if you only hang out with other non-native speakers, then as I said, you'll copy each other's mistakes. So I can't remember the exact mistake, but I do remember seeing, I think it must have been like a Brazilian and a Japanese person, and then they were talking to each other, and one of them made a blatant mistake, and as a native English speaker, I could hear it, and I could hear that it was incorrect. And then the Brazilian asked the Japanese person if it was correct or not. Just gonna create like a random example of like what it might have been. I think the Brazilian said, "I didn't went home," which as native English speakers, you can hear that that's incorrect. It's "I didn't go home." And then so he's like, "I didn't went home. Is that correct?" to the Japanese person. And the Japanese person's native language was not English. So he's like, "Yeah, I didn't went home. That's correct." And then you see, like, one of them had a mistake. One of them like had a grammatical error, and then he asked his other non-native speaker of English friend if that was correct or not, and then the other person said yes, and then now that Brazilian will continue to keep making that same mistake. And there's nothing wrong with that, because like people will understand what he means. But if he had just asked a Canadian, "Is this correct?" then a Canadian can be like, "No, it's "I didn't go home," not "I didn't went home." And then I just feel like by talking to native speakers, you can avoid these problems. So there are some situations where I'll make an exception and speak to non-native speakers. If someone comes up to me and then they start speaking to me in like Spanish or something, and they're from, I don't know, England, I'm not going to be like, "Yeah, like, don't talk to me. Like, I'm not going to waste my time with you. Like, that's rude. I'm not going to do that." But it's just like, when I learn a foreign language, I want to get to like a high level, and I want to be as close to native as possible. Obviously, that's very difficult, but I would like to get as close to that as possible. And it's really hard to do that when I'm learning from non-native speakers, because that's not authentic. Like, maybe they can be close, but it's not authentic. So my analogy for this is, if you have the option to learn how to drive from like a driver who had been driving for like 10 years, or you could learn from someone who just got their license, like, which one would you choose? You would choose the more experienced driver, because like what you'd be taught would be more authentic and more like real to life, and like it'd be more helpful, and you wouldn't be like learning the new driver's mistakes. So like, that is my reasoning behind only practicing the language learning with native speakers. There are some other situations where I'd make exceptions, like for example with Esperanto. That was a creative language, so my goal is not really to like speak Esperanto as authentically as possible, because like most people who speak Esperanto have learned it as a second language. So like, as much as there are native speakers, at least that's what I read, they don't make up the majority. So it would almost be unreasonable for me to want to speak Esperanto like a native speaker, because like there aren't that many out there. So with Esperanto, I would make an exception and speak to non-native speakers. But like, if it was like French or German or Chinese, I would try to refrain from doing it, just because it's just like my personal goal. Like, everybody has different goals when they learn different languages, but like my goal, as I said, is to try and get as close to like a native like level as possible. And the only way that I can personally do that, at least from what I've seen so far throughout my language learning journey, is to only speak with native speakers. So thank you for watching this video. As I said, you are all free to disagree. This is like a controversial topic from what I've seen, but this is just my opinion. I just wanted to add this part to the video just to make sure that like everything that I said was understood and that like nothing is being taken out of context or anything. So I'm not saying, first of all, like, I don't want to say that like my method or my way of learning is better than anybody else's. I also don't want to sound pretentious or condescending or anything. I also want to emphasize the fact that you're allowed to disagree and that this is solely my opinion and that everybody learns differently, and this is just my opinion, as I said. And if I were to meet somebody from, I'm gonna use a random country as an example. Let's say I meet somebody from the Congo and the only common language that we have was German for some weird reason, then I would speak to them in German. I'm not gonna forgo communication completely just because I'm afraid that we might copy each other's mistakes, or that like they might like acquire some of my mistakes or I might acquire some of theirs. I'm not gonna forgo communication completely because of that. But if I can avoid it and only speak to native speakers of the language, then I would prefer to do that. I'm not gonna not talk to people because it's not their native language. I just prefer to get like natural, authentic input that comes from native speakers. Because as I said in the video, there are some mistakes that non-native speakers make when they speak a language that is new to them. And then native speakers make mistakes too. Like I make mistakes. There's probably tons of like little slip-ups in my videos and stuff. But mistakes that native speakers make follow a different pattern than mistakes that non-native speakers make, from what I've seen. So, no, even if you learn to make mistakes, like if you learn to make the same mistakes a native speaker makes, then you still sound kind of native because like you're making native speaker mistakes. But if you make mistakes that like a second language learner would make, then you just sound like a second language learner, if that makes sense. Anyway, I just wanted to clear all of this up in the video. And yeah, if you disagree or you do agree, you can all leave comments. And yeah, thank you for watching the video.